Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we're really excited to be finally here on this webinar to launch this piece of work that we've done with Singapore Management University on philanthropy. And this has been something in the works between Hang Woo and ourselves and his team at SMU for about 9 months probably, and we really wanted to launch it at the end of last year, and we were waiting. Beginning of this year, and we were waiting, and then this pandemic struck us, and we took the opportunity in this crisis to re-look at the topic that we wanted to talk about, which is philanthropy in Asia, and how we can use this pandemic really to galvanize thinking, to galvanize hope, and to galvanize action. And so I'd really like to thank everyone for joining us today. We have almost 400 people registered. I'm not quite sure how many have logged on, but probably almost 200 so far have logged on. Most of you are in Singapore, Malaysia, and Hong Kong, and we thank you for your interest. I'd also like to thank, obviously, SMU, Professor Hang Woo and his team at SMU for agreeing to do this piece of work with us. We felt that really, when we talk about philanthropy, and we talk a lot about philanthropy in Labuan, being a wealth management structuring center, we talk a lot about philanthropy, and we always seem to think that there's a mindset difference between philanthropy in Asia and philanthropy in other parts of the world, and we wanted to really explore this. And then I'd also like to thank Eileen and Professor Chow for joining us in the panel later. And really to take a step back and to think about, the situation that we're all facing today under the pandemic circumstance, and how really it's galvanized human spirit, and how giving is such a natural part of being part of humanity. And we really would like to find a way to allow everyone to give. And if there's anything that COVID and this pandemic has taught us, at least in Malaysia anyway, is the fact that everyone wants to give. It should not be limited to the ones that have really a lot to give. Everyone should have the joy of giving allowed to them. And really, it's about the ability to give into something that is well-structured, well-governed, and we'd like to talk a little bit about that. But before that, I would like to run a poll. So we're going to run, for your information, we're running 2 polls. One before Hang Woo comes and joins us and talks about his presentation that he's going to go through. And the other one after that, before we start the panel. So could we have the first poll for everyone to click on? And the first poll really is about, do you agree that, is it up yet? Yes, it's up. Sorry, I can't see that screen, yeah? So please excuse my ignorance. That poll is, do you agree that Asian high net worth individuals are less structured in their approach to philanthropy? So do you agree that we're more colloquial in our giving, we're less structured, we're more emotive maybe? Is it a cultural thing? So please click away. And I think it's still on at the moment. And while you're clicking, I'd like to maybe do a very cursory introduction to Professor Hang Woo. Really, where do we start? I mean, when I first met Hang Woo, it was towards doing an event in Singapore, and we really started talking about philanthropy, about the region, about wealth management, and really the potential of this. And then from that discussion, what happened was we came up with this idea about dissecting philanthropy in Asia, and looking at it from a mindset point of view, a cultural point of view, or is it just the ability to have access to certain structures, right? Is it just the issue of maybe in Asia, the structures are not available? Or could it be that there's an issue of taxation, right? A lot of the issues surrounding philanthropy outside Asia is driven by tax credits, is driven by taxation issues. And in Asia, maybe, you know, because I am Asian, 150%, I'd like to think that we're more altruistic in maybe our giving. So when we give very emotively, we give very culturally, we give very religiously. And maybe it's time for us to find a middle ground, right? Because there's no right, no wrong. The truth tends to be somewhere in the middle. So if you don't mind, what I will do is read out from Hang Wu's bio a little bit before I hand it over to him for his presentation. Yeah. So Tan Hang Wu is professor and director at the Center of Cross-Border Commercial Law in Asia at the School of Law, Singapore Management University. Hang Wu is also a consultant for TSMP Law Corporation, where he co-heads the Trust and Private Wealth Desk. His research interest includes land law, restitution, equity trust, charity, and non-profit law. Hang Wu is obviously very well known and very widely published. He is known as the Mr., and this is not in his bio, this is just me, by the way, as Mr. Can Do, and I have found him to be the most wonderful, open person that I've met. One of the most open, cheerful, open persons that I've met. And it's been a great pleasure for the team and I here to work with Hang Wu and his team at SMU. Hang Wu, if you'd like to go through your presentation now, and we look forward to the panel with you later as well. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Farah. It's been a really great experience working with your team. And I think speaking for myself, Yip Man and Vincent Ooi has been a joy working with Labuan on this paper. And I'm delighted to be on this panel with Chow and also Elin. So let me share my screen now in relation to the slide, where the idea of this paper came from a conversation over a long dinner with Farah, where we were talking about why is it that there are all these studies about Asians giving less. And then there's that famous story of Bill Gates and Warren Buffett going to China, holding this big dinner, and very few philanthropists or wealthy people came to that dinner. So there was that story, and Farah and our instinct was that perhaps the real point here wasn't that Asians give very little. Asians give in a very informal way. And also, I think that our instincts, which is borne out by this study, is that Asians think about charity beginning at home, and therefore they will help out and start giving to their clan, religion, and race. And that seems to be and is borne out by the research. And therefore, in this paper, which we wrote pre-COVID, we were thinking about how do we change the mindset, because and this was pre-COVID. We were thinking that a lot of our problems span not just in our religious communities or our racial community, but it is across the society. And I think COVID has shown us this, that when we want to tackle problems, we have to think across societies in dealing with this. And therefore, in this paper, I think we came up with a few strategies about how to tackle these kind of mindsets. And we thought about changing the mindsets. We talk about having tech-enabled philanthropy. We talk about having low-hanging fruits of having perhaps awards for Asian philanthropists that is set up in this region instead of relying on Western organizations such as Forbes. But one of the central thesis or argument that we try to make in this paper is about structures. And I know we have a lot of legal professionals and finance professionals in this audience. We are thinking that perhaps one way of encouraging philanthropy is to have a more accessible structures to enable Asian giving. And here in this slide, I just want to show the rise of Asian global wealth. And in this COVID times, we know that a lot of charities all over the world, whether it's in Malaysia, Hong Kong, or Singapore, are stepping in, working together with the government to meet these needs that COVID has presented. But again, these charities are now facing and struggling this issue of funding, because obviously when businesses struggle, when people struggle, the funding and to these charities are drying up. And we have this example in Hong Kong. And therefore the argument or the main thinking that we were pursuing in this paper is this idea of setting up donor advised funds, which are found in a few Asian jurisdictions, but certainly not in Hong Kong and not in Malaysia. And the donor advised fund structure is actually quite a simple structure to understand. Basically, you have a sponsor, and then and the donor will then pay a certain amount of money, or it could be shares as well into this fund. And the sponsor will own the particular asset. It's an irrevocable gift. And then in some jurisdictions, immediate tax benefits will be obtained once you do that. And then the sponsor provides advisory services, typically free of charge, to the donor, and then will channel that to the non-profit. Now, this structure is quite common in the United States, but not that common in other parts of this jurisdiction or other jurisdiction. And I'll explain a little bit more in my later slides about why this donor advised funds may present a better way of thinking of structuring philanthropy, and also the potential criticism of the donor advised funds. So as I did my research on donor advised funds in Asia, I found that the Osaka Community Foundation seems to be one of the earliest donor advised funds, set up in, I think, 1991 in Japan. And it was inspired again by someone who went to America and saw this community foundation. Now, the Beautiful Foundation in Korea presents a very interesting perspective. And the Beautiful Foundation in Korea is also a donor advised funds. And the thing about the donor advised funds is that it raises funding. In the past, people raised funding by showing children in rags and poor people who have no food to eat. But for these donor advised funds, they move from the model of showing the beneficiaries into the donor story. So for the Beautiful Foundation, it's the focus on the so-called beautiful donor. And this is what is presented when I studied about the Beautiful Foundation, and also promoting a culture of giving. So the donor advised fund, the sponsor there, becomes a leader in the philanthropic circle in that jurisdiction. And the Beautiful Foundation here have a campaign of a 1% sharing of your net worth. So we see that the donor advised fund, the sponsors coming in to be the leaders in the philanthropic world. Now, in terms of China, so I did some research on the community foundations in China, and I came across this paper in 2019 that suggests that there are about 63 kinds of 63 listed community foundation, at least in this paper, but there is not much information in relation to this community foundation. Right now, coming to Singapore, which is a jurisdiction that I know best, we have two kinds of donor advised funds in Singapore. And the first is the Community Foundation of Singapore. So full disclosure, I am a donor, I'm on some donor committee of the Community Foundation of Singapore. All right. It started in 2008 with full support of the ministry. I think the Ministry of Culture, Youth and Sports. So there is a very strong community support or government support for the Community Foundation of Singapore. And if you look at the figures that have been raised by the Community Foundation of Singapore, the figures are pretty impressive. 147 million donations raised since 2008, and importantly, to look at the grants disbursed, which is $82 million of grants disbursed. So it has a very impressive record of donation and disbursement. And then I think Community Foundation of Singapore is an example of the government thinking about working in the philanthropic circle, and also forwarding its own agenda, right? Because for every dollar that is collected by the Community Foundation and disbursed to the community, that is a dollar less that the government has to spend on social services. So this is I think the Community Foundation is an example. Now, the Community Foundation as well, again, we see this not just in this jurisdiction, but it becomes the leader in the philanthropic world. And therefore, they have programs such as like the co-labs, i.e. They bring together, let's say for the next 3 days, people from government, non-profit, the social sector to think about a particular area, and to see how do they solve a particular area, whether there's any replication, whether there are any gaps in the services, what are the weaknesses, etc. And after these kind of collabs, then there perhaps funding can be disbursed where the gaps has been identified. All right, so we see a government supported kind of initiative in the Community Foundation of Singapore. Now, moving to the private sector, we see Credit Suisse also having a donor advised fund model. All right, so this is something which I took from the Credit Suisse website and report. And basically, it's the same structure. You come up with a fund, and that it is specified to a particular cause which you are particularly passionate about. Now, in relation to the Community Foundation of Singapore, what I understand is that you can start a fund for 200,000 Singapore dollars. Whereas, if I'm not mistaken, Credit Suisse is about 1 million to start a fund. And I think for these kinds of structure, what you need is for people to have a trust in these kind of structure. Because in terms of philanthropy, if there's a trust deficit, that is what prevents people from giving. So the structure of Credit Suisse donor advice model, we see a very strong board of directors. The donor advice fund in Credit Suisse is called SIM Asia, and it's led by National Treasurer, Professor Tommy Koh. So we have a very strong kind of structure. And looking at the figures are very impressive as well. This is what newsletter in 2020, 170 million collected and 120 million disbursed. So a very high rate of disbursement in the SIM Asia as well. Now, the donor advice funds, when we did research on that, has been criticized very badly in the West as billionaires getting tax breaks and sitting on billions of dollars meant for charities. But in our research, we don't see that, at least not happening in Singapore. And I think that what happened in the US is this idea of tech billionaires. Before they IPO their company, they will take a chunk of shares and they will then put in the donor advice funds, get a huge tax break, and then after that, they don't disburse the monies there. But again, we don't see that kind of thing happening in Asia. And I think that is not a criticism of the model itself. It can be worked with government with the relevant tax incentives. Now, what then is the advantage of the donor advice fund? Now, the principal advantage of the donor advice fund is that you are not a passive donor. You don't donate, let's say, to the community chest of Hong Kong or the community chest of Singapore, and you rely on the community chest to disburse the funds, right? You are principal actor. So for example, if you're very passionate about education, which most Asians, that's the main thing, right? Very passionate about education. But then the sponsor may advise you to say that, look, for education, what is not funded well are special needs education, technical education. Nobody wants to fund that because perhaps that's not regarded as glamorous or doesn't come to the mind. And therefore, you can be more effective and use your monies in underserved area. Now, the other point about the donor advice fund is that it doesn't just allow the ultra high net worth, the Li Ka-shings, or the Ananda Krishna to donate. Although it's a large sum, for example, the community foundation, you can start a fund for $200,000. And therefore, in Singapore, at least, I think that band potentially is quite large. So, and there's a market to be tapped, and we see the community foundation doing that. I think we've touched about effective advisory service for donors for underserved areas, also promoting good governance and being leaders in the field, and also working across the aisle with other sectors to solve pressing problems. And it serves as a fund, certainly as a fund for a rainy day. And certainly we are now in a rainy day situation where it is pouring. So this is, I think, our main idea about setting up effective structures for if you work in a bank or a trust companies that we can think about, because we don't see this kind of structure in Hong Kong, in Malaysia. But we do not pretend that that is that it will solve all the problems. I think the Center for Asian Philanthropy and Society in Hong Kong is doing extremely good work, putting together the pieces that these are the pieces that you need to have a vibrant philanthropic circle. And they even rank jurisdictions where they are not doing enough, doing okay, doing better. Note that no jurisdiction in Asia is doing excellently. All right, so concluding thought is that perhaps as professionals, legal and financial professionals, we can think about nudging our clients into thinking about effective philanthropy. As leaders, we can think about setting up structures to promote effective philanthropy, whether it's with our governments or our organization. I think that with that, I'll come to an end and we will start the panel discussion.
Thanks, Han-Woo. That was very interesting. I was very interested in the Korean donor advice funds, especially grandmother Kim's fund.
Yes.
The fact that she was a sex slave and she gave away all her money except for her funeral expenses towards this. It's amazing. And really, it's about democratizing giving. It's allowing everyone to give, and that's fantastic. I got the results from our first poll. Which stated, do you agree that Asian high net worth individuals are less structured in how we give? And 81% of 190 people who are watching us now agreed with that. So, there is obviously work to be done. What I wanted to highlight before we go into the panel is a couple of things. Number one, the research report, which is this, is now available on our website, labuanibfc.com. And it talks about the way we could structure one of these things. And it talks also about some of the findings that the paper has come up with, which is obviously there are changes in Asia. So number one, yes, we need a more structured way of giving. Number two, there is a changing mindset. So we're becoming more open, we're less passive. And generation 2, generation 3, definitely the ambition is to transform the society that they live in, and to have a lasting legacy. There's an issue of social inclusion. There's a need for pushing the inclusion agenda. There's also a lot more cross-border mindsets. So, you're not looking at a situation where you're more colloquial in your giving. You want to give to a mandate, to a particular interest that crosses jurisdictions. And also, there's the issue of technology, right? And when I say issue, I don't mean it in a bad way. Technology is a great facilitator. So if you have a structure like a DAF, a donor advice fund, that is then layered with DLT, some kind of blockchain technology that is able to facilitate governance, transparency. There's a natural fit, in my mind at least, between giving, the want to give, and transparency that technology will bring. And I think there's a lot of potential in that. And then the whole issue of democratizing philanthropy. So have a look at the report. And the team from both sides have worked really hard at producing this, and we were quite proud of it, Hang Wu, if I dare say that. Now what I'd like to do, the second thing I'd like to do is actually ask you guys to vote again on the next question, which is, do you think COVID-19 has actually created a need for a more structured and accessible approach to philanthropy in Asia? Right? So have we seen that actually this crisis is an opportunity for us to galvanize how we give, our mentality towards giving, the sustainability of giving? And I think that's one thing that's very important as Asians with our mindset is the sustainability of our giving, right? So I think you guys are able to vote now, and this will be available still on your screens. And whilst you're busy clicking away, what I'd like to do very quickly is to introduce the other two panelists. So you guys have heard from Hang Wu and his presentation. And then we've got here Professor Chow, she from Hong Kong. He is the Outstanding Fellow of the Faculty of Law, the Chinese University of Hong Kong. He's concurrently Associate Dean and Head of Graduate Division of the Law Faculty as well. He's published extensively in peer-reviewed international journals. And I have to admit, I've met Hang Wu a few times and Elaine a few times, but Professor Chow is one of those Zoom friends that I have met over the last, 4 or 5 months. And we've never actually met physically, Professor, but I'd like to think that we know each other quite well. And I'd like to really personally thank you for joining us today.
Great pleasure.
Thank you very much. And the next panelist actually requires no introduction. Everybody knows who Eileen is. And we're glad she's back in Malaysia, enjoying the sunshine in Penang. She's now leading the private wealth mandate and push for Asia for Deloitte's private, right, Eileen? And thank you once again for joining us. We really look forward to your insights for this panel. I think the poll is done now. We've got the numbers now. So 80% again, so that's a resounding yes to the fact that there is opportunity in a crisis, very, very much like the Chinese saying, right? There is opportunity. Well, that's probably my second most favorite Chinese saying. The first is that the man is the head of the family and the woman's the neck. But this is probably the second most favorite, which is there is an opportunity in every crisis and even in philanthropy. So I'd like to start the conversation, the panel. I think you're able to ask your questions through the screen here. But I've got a few questions that I've put aside, that I've set aside for the panel. And I'd like to start with Professor Chow, actually. If you don't mind. Prof, do you think that North Asian families, so we're going into Asia, yes, and then now we're focusing on really North Asian families a little bit. Do you think North Asian families are ready to be more open about their activities? Because there's a lot of privacy that seems to shroud, in a way, giving in Asia, especially in North Asia as well. But Asia generally, do you think that that Asian communities are able to be more open now?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. The North Asian jurisdictions that I looked at, for example, mainland China, Hong Kong, and some of the neighboring jurisdictions, you're seeing the newer generation showing a different mindset towards giving. Now, traditionally, as I'm sure you know very well, and I'm sure many know the audience would know very well, giving or philanthropy was having a, if you like, a bad name in the sense of opportunistic giving, that donors, the givers were making donations simply to gain government special favors. So that was the old perception, which is no longer the case. I think over time we are seeing a lot of one-time donation for disaster relief in North Asia. So you have the earthquake, you have the tsunami, you have all these very unfortunate incidents happening in the last decades or so. We are seeing a change of mindset in that sense. That's one thing. Now, the second thing that I would emphasize is that with the economy maturing, especially when I'm actually thinking of mainland China, as you know very well, the economy really took off in a way from after China's accession to WTO, which was about 2 decades ago. So we see a accumulation of private wealth. Really as a recent phenomena in much of mainland China. Hong Kong was slightly different, but not that different. So I think it's a natural process of maturing. It's a natural process of learning from the experience. It's a natural process of the second generation, well, in some cases, third generation, bringing on board some of the notions that they have learned from the West. So in some cases, sometimes they learn from their own traditional routes and thinking of giving more structural, in a more structured way, in a more strategic way. Now, having said all this, the difficulty from the academic point of view, obviously, is that our observations are very much based upon anecdotal evidence. We do have this difficulty, as I think Han has indicated, of accessing information necessary for us to make any, if you like, or scientific or systematic observations. But anecdotal evidence we have is given as indication that things are changing in the past decade, if you like. I will just keep it brief, and I may just add on other points as we move on. Thank you.
Actually, while I have you, Prof, there's been a question here from Anne, and she's asking a very pointed question. She's saying, is there any reason you think why DAFs, donor advised funds, have not been developed in Hong Kong?
Oh, that's a great question. We have looked into this question. There's a legal issue here, as I was given to understand. The process of setting up a DAF is said to be burdensome under Hong Kong law. So it's not a natural choice. That's one thing. Now, secondly, there's a well-entrenched, if you like, tradition of some wealthy families in Hong Kong running their own foundations, their own philanthropies. This is obviously not based upon public information, but the informal soundings that we have is that they run it in their own way. They do have their advisors, as I understand, in a private circle of advisors advising their own donations, givens. I think in the case of Hong Kong, it's a combination, the confluence of legal considerations and a tradition.
Yeah, I mean, the oldest family offices, let's say, for example, right, are based out of Japan. So, it's just not seen as a family office. The moniker is not a family office, as it were. And a lot of it is run out of the enterprise themselves, So it's sometimes it's just cultural, sometimes it's just what you call it, and sometimes us not wanting to talk about it, being very private Asians, as it were. But yeah, I think that there's a combination. There's a combination there. How, I know this is not a agreed question, but the DAFs in Singapore, how are they structured?
I think that you don't need a particular structure, right? It could be. I think that the Community Foundation of Singapore is a charity with an institute of public character. Credit Suisse is also, I think, an institute of public character. But again, it depends on what kind of donation you want to make. So if you make a donation for principally, I think, a cause abroad, you may not get the tax deduction. But if you make a donation in relation to a fund that benefits the people of Singapore, you will get the tax deduction. So I think that you don't really need a particular structure. You just need some kind of corporate structure that can ring fence the funds, and that's essentially all you need. I feel, of course, you need to work with the regulators to get charitable status and Institute of Public Character. And also, I think you need a very strong board of directors to give the public confidence in it. So I don't think the structure is anything, pose any problems. Yeah.
But in the paper, we do speak about the Labuan Protected Cell Company. And how it can be used, probably, as a structure, because what you've got is management at the top, the different cells. Of course, we're not looking at tax deductibility necessarily, so it could be that it's just a structure that is akin to a DAF, but is run by maybe a bunch of families with a similar mindset, and then what you have there is an opportunity to open up the giving to a lower middle level of the wealthy, number one, to ensure transparency, and for people to come together, people to come together, people with similar mindsets to come together and to have a structure that they can easily tweak and use. Elaine, I wanted to come to you about your dealings with families in Asia and whether you see, whether as time goes by, as it were, are they more receptive to more structures? Are they more open? What is your thinking? Is it a mindset issue? Is it an awareness issue? Do you think something like a DAF would be of interest to them?
That's a good question. From my experience, I have been working primarily with families in the ultra high net worth or high net worth space. And a lot of times, over time, I have seen that clients are more and more getting receptive to more structured giving. Now, that being said, it also depends on the objectives that the family has for giving, right? What is the underlying goal, their intentions, and where is the family in the giving journey, right? Are they right at the beginning of the journey, or have they progressed quite a lot? They've had quite a lot of experience of giving and good experience with it, and they want to take it to the next level. Now, of course, the biggest objective most clients will have is giving back to society, right? Like help the families set up a hospital. They set up a hospital, a community hospital, to give back to their community. And then they set up a trust to sustain that hospital, a charitable trust. But there are other reasons as well, okay? Families have other reasons other than just giving back to society. Some, especially the new wealth, could be, they want to be seen as philanthropists, to be moving in that circle. Some do, are engaged in a lot of checkbook giving. That was the past, right? Checkbook giving. I am on the board of quite a few different charities. So you donate to me and I'll donate to you. You scratch my back, I scratch yours, that sort of thing. And not to say that everyone who, that those who volunteer their precious time and talents have these intentions only, but fine, that may be behind as well. Also, there's families who actually want the philanthropy giving to be a training ground or a place for their family members to get engaged. Yeah, to involve the evolution of values to the families, so that the next generation can learn to make decisions. Siblings or aunties and uncles can get involved. All right. So there are many reasons, but I do agree that the next generation of wealth, they have an impact on the giving, right? And that's why. The first generation now needs to think with the transition of wealth. They need to think about more structured giving, because they may have one style of giving, but that who's going to continue that legacy? Yeah, if they don't have a structure, and they don't even have an effective or strategic giving, they just give left, right, and center depending on the spur of the moment. That gives them a lot of control. It gives them a lot of flexibility. Yeah, but then who's going to continue that? Yeah, when they are no longer around. So, and with the next generation's emphasis on social impact, social investing, yeah, wanting to see a difference, wanting that accountability, that generally can only come when you have a more strategic giving. Yeah, when you give strategically, the organizations you support can plan strategically. Someone once told me long ago, sometimes it's far better to spread out your giving to a smallish, charity or MPO, instead of giving them $1 million in 1 year and they don't know what to do with that huge amount of cash, give them that 100,000 spread over 10 years. They know they are guaranteed that revenue, that funding. They can then put in a 10-year plan that will be sustainable, that will be impactful, and you can actually see the difference made. So I would say, yes, they're becoming more receptive for all these reasons, but again, it depends. So if, again, a client is very much into, thinking that they want a lot of, it's not really for just, not a deep desire for strategic giving, then they'll probably just keep going with the non-structured approach. But if they're really concerned, then they will go more structured. And what kind of structures? I mean, we've helped clients put in mixed private trusts, right? You have your own family beneficiaries as well as charitable. They've set up pure charitable trusts. They set up charitable foundations, yayasans. They use company limited by guarantee, like believe the Community Foundation of Singapore is the CLG. Some even use just a private limited company, but then there are pros and cons to that. Some set up private trust companies to manage that. And a lot of the wealthy, ultra wealthy families will have family offices that run these philanthropic arms, right? So again,
just to segue, there is a question here that actually, beautifully segues into this. It's from Sam, and he's asking, have you seen a preference between trusts, CLGs, foundations, for DAFs or for any kind of structured giving, basically? Do you see there's any preference in a particular structure?
Well, just being based in, so I think that's an interesting question because first of all, you will hear a lot of the words foundations. Charitable foundations in Asia. But when you look at it, when you look at the legal structuring, the legal entity, it is typically not the civil law type of foundations, the Anstalt or Stiftungs that a lawyer would be familiar with, right? A civil law lawyer. So typically they're not. But why then are charitable? When you look at the crux of it, what is it? It is typically either a charitable trust or a CLG or some sort of other entity, right? Typically those. So why is there this confusion? Why do people call it foundations when it's really not a civil law foundation? It's just that historically, foundation law was set up for charitable purposes. And then only recently, countries have adapted it like Liechtenstein and they've adapted it for private wealth transition, right? Okay. So again, being based in this part of the world where it's mainly common law, I have seen more the use of trusts, right? Charitable trusts or mixed trusts. And a couple of Labuan foundations, yes. A lot of our high net worth individuals really do find that, the Labuan Foundation can work very well for them as their own vehicle. Yeah, they can get it professionally run. It's quite cost effective. Maybe the only issue is the substance requirement, right? Substance requirements.
If something to say?
If I can jump in, I think from the Singapore perspective, right, the difficulty is getting charitable status if you are a foreign family trying to set up a charity that's in Singapore. I think the Commissioner of Charities are slightly suspicious. What is your motive? And also the interference perhaps with political conditions in Singapore. So it's not that easy to get the charitable status. And therefore, I think that these community foundation or DAFs can be a segue before you have your full-blown charity, i.e. you come in, you do some work in Singapore, the government or commissioner of charities think, okay, these people are all right, they are not here to do anything, they don't have ulterior motives, and then you set up the foundation. So it's like baby steps towards something bigger. So that's what I've seen and heard about.
I would absolutely agree with you, Hang Woo. That's from my experience as well. A lot of times, clients start off giving 101 in a way, using these donor advice funds because it's easier. You know, if we want to encourage giving, I don't care. I mean, a lot of times we say, we don't really care about why you give, as long as you give, because it benefits the beneficiaries, right? But so you make it easy for them to give. And by using donor advice funds like this, it helps them to start their journey. And then when they have good experiences, when their wealth grows bigger and bigger, then they can consider setting up their own structure as necessary. Sometimes not even necessary. They may say, this is great. You know, I don't need that much control. It meets my purposes. Great. Yeah. It just depends again on the settlor. I mean, you know, the person, how much control do they want? How much involvement do they want? And what kind of structure is it? Endowment or term or just a flow through, etc.
But for me personally, anyway, I mean, I think all these structures have pros and cons. And, you know, we're not in a cookie cutter business, right? Clients are extremely demanding. They're very opinionated. They know what they want. Most of the times they'll come to advisors already knowing what they want. I think for me personally, anyway, the idea of a DAF is that it democratizes giving. So it allows, you know, more than just the ultra high net worth individuals to be able to contribute. And really, you know, during the COVID, during the initial phase of lockdown in Malaysia, you saw this outpouring of support, especially for the frontliners. You know, it got to the stage where everyone was collecting, everyone was donating in some way, shape, or form, whether it is money, time, effort. And really what struck me at that point is when we started, and then I reached out to Hang Woo and said, you know, we have this piece of work, we need to tweak it, because the DAF allows for management of giving. So it democratizes it. So it allows, you know, people like me with a lot less money to also feel the comfort of, oh, I'm giving. It's a gift to give, you know, for me anyway. And also, you know that it's going somewhere where there is a mandate, there is strategy, there is planning, and there is governance in the giving. So, you know, the idea of, you know, ultra high net worth individuals, crazy rich Asians giving is one thing, but the disparity between the have and the have-nots in Asia is, I mean, probably the closest continent is Africa, you know, that you have such disparity, and the DAF is able to maybe possibly bridge that a little bit, you know. And that segues nicely to the next question that I have for everyone on the panel, is this idea of this virus. As COVID that we're all living with, or we're trying to live with and trying to manage, do you think it's encouraged giving? Or do you think that the encouragement from COVID is just a knee-jerk reaction? And that actually, as the economy starts to really pressure down on us, whether that will stop giving? You know, what are your thoughts looking forward about this? Maybe Professor Chow, would you like to start?
I agree with you. You know, you know, in every crisis there are opportunities. Or if you like, you know, Winston Churchill, you will say you never allow you know, a good crisis to go to waste. So it's a similar line of thinking. I think COVID-19 offers really a great opportunities to reflect upon the very nature of giving. And I do echo your point, Farah, which is democratization of giving. DAF presents a wonderful structure by which given, especially for those who are high net worth, but not the ultra wealthy, to give and to have a way of control, a sense of control over how their giving can be utilized to achieve the social purposes, the social goods. What I would also like to add is technology. Is also offering opportunities of giving, even for those who are not particularly wealthy. Now, for example, as in case of mainland China, for example, you have Alibaba, Tencent, who are running essentially the online charities, online foundations, which everyone can give as much as one yuan or 1 B, which is about it's about 20 cents US. So that is another way of democratizing giving in the case of COVID-19, which is you don't really have to be wealthy to give, as long as technology can facilitate this. So I think yes, I think in that sense, COVID-19 is probably giving everyone opportunities to take a pause. To reflect on the meaning of giving, in a sense, the meaning of life, and to give. So that's something which, to my delight, that is happening. That is happening in North Asia, if you like.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And really, the very the virtuous cycle of this opportunity in this crisis, coupled with technology. If we didn't have technology at our disposal, the issue of transparency, the issue of governance would then be called into question. But with DLT and the transparency that DLT allows, especially if it's an open network, an open ledger, then really, there's no reason to question. Hang-Woo, do you want to say a couple of words about this whole thing, maybe the technology aspect, as part of our research paper as well?
Yeah, I think that the point here about whether post-COVID, if we ever get out of it, will mean reduce giving. And here I'm thinking about 3 aspects. One is that I think that for professionals like us who advise clients, I think that we should nudge them to thinking about their legacy, that look, how much do you really need for your family? Why not, when you are planning your wealth transmission, think about your legacy in terms of philanthropy. So I'm thinking there positive steps that we as professionals can do in promoting this space. And the other 2 is that those of us who work with charities is that I think that there are some causes that really resonate with young people nowadays that will motivate them, and they're very passionate about it. And I think that 2 causes, I think climate change is something that I hear it's very concerning in relation to young people like my students. And also, I think, Farah, you started this conversation when we talked about the COVID and how it always affects the poorer, and inequality is something that I think young people are very concerned about. And therefore, when we're thinking about philanthropy and technology, I think these causes for those who work in the charitable sectors could be pushed to the forefront, and then getting fundraising along these causes. I think that could perhaps encourage quite a lot of giving post-COVID.
Yeah, no, and in a lot of instances, this tech, the developers have no access to advisors like yourself, and you have access to the money, as it were. And sometimes, I'm a strong believer in the power of bringing people together, and facilitating giving via tech, and allowing the technical programmers to meet advisors like yourself might be a good idea in order for us to move this concept forward. I don't know, do you think your families will be interested in something like this? Elaine?
I think, yes, I would think they would. What I find is that some family, sometimes we have to also build awareness in the families that some of their funds is not just going to the end client, but if it's going through a charity, that funds can help build capability within that MPO or charity. The MPO also needs computers. They need, supporting facilities to do their work better, sustainably, right? So that is part of the educating of the client, and part of it is also educating maybe the charities how they can collect, use technology, right, to be more efficient in their work. So yes, I think that would be a very interesting perspective to share with learning with the families. And I find that working with the families, especially in COVID now, right, the COVID situation has really brought home the fact that mortality is very real. It's very real. It could happen. In fact, one of the families I'm working right now, the patriarch, we had to postpone a family meeting because he contracted COVID and was hospitalized. So, but the good thing is a great deal of the family governance has been already discussed, with the family, which comes to this other point about you families, whether they have structured giving or not structured giving. How do families make decisions about what to give? Is it just one guy who decides? Or do you want to make it inclusive and get your family involved? Educate your children. Maybe give, if for smaller, we're not talking about the ultra high net worth or high net worth. You can encourage your children because you want them to give, right? To be generous, to not think of we and us instead of just I and me.
Yes.
Right? And encourage them to save some of the pocket money or part of their birthday presents, and then collectively make a decision. That way they are practicing family decision making and communication, which is the heart of family governance.
Absolutely. And also there's that idea via, let's say, a structure where there is the giving up of control to a certain extent, but yet there's still influence. Right? And so we've spoken a lot about Asians and the issue of privacy, but also Asians can be somewhat control freaks. And I have to call a spade, and we like to know everything, the details, everything. So, with a structure where we completely, not to say lose, but relinquish control, might be a little bit less attractive, but with a structure like a DAF or a foundation where there is still the ability, so like a trust that doesn't quite apply, but with a CLG and with a foundation or a DAF, that would apply in the sense that you still have access to control, you have influence.
Yes, right? And I think it depends on what kind of control the family wants. Is it control over the beneficiaries, over who receives the funds? Is it control of the investments? Is it control over costs? Right? Yeah. So it's all a balancing game, right? If you want to lower your costs, which a lot of Asian clients are also very sensitive to, right? Well, if you want a lot of control and then set up your own vehicle, by all means. But then it also means you have to bear all the costs. And one other thing about this whole sphere of philanthropy that hasn't been discussed yet too, is this whole area of anti-money laundering. Yeah, and this is the regulatory issue about be careful who you give to, and also because you want to be sure, do your due diligence that the funds are actually reaching the beneficiaries and not going to nefarious purposes. So due diligence is something that if you do it on your own, due diligence is on you. But if you work through a donor advised funds and there's some advisory capability there, I would expect that the DEF has a committee that would have already done due diligence on this panel of worthy recipients, and can also get the accountability, the reports, making sure the money actually arrives. What have you done with it? Yeah, nothing squirreled away into somebody's pocket somewhere, right?
Yeah. And I think that's what Hang Wu was talking about in the presentation earlier, where the committee within the DAF or management within the DAF, however you want to slice it, is then able to direct funds in a particular way because they understand the need They understand the timeline, the sustainability of how the giving has to happen. You know, I was on another panel earlier, a couple of months ago. It's a Singapore blockchain event where we were talking about giving as well. And someone made a very interesting point. They talked about, you know, the COVID and all this kind of stuff, and they were saying, yeah, everyone wants to give towards COVID, but nobody is thinking about giving phones, right? Because today, access to information is not via television anymore, right? There used to be a time where you would have a PSA, public service announcement, going, be careful, stay out of your house, blah, blah, blah. Now it all comes via these things, right? So it's as basic sometimes, this giving is as basic as giving a medium, you know, not necessarily just absolute giving towards a cause. It's facilitating facilitating the benefit, as it were, you know, making sure that there's an ability. I wanted to just talk a little bit more about the research, Hang Woo, and the team, and the team at SMU, and how we were looking at giving, and how you felt that really very passionately that across Asia there has to be more sustainable giving, there has to be structures like this, and whilst it's available in Singapore, we also would like to encourage private-public partnerships, you know, and I think that's mentioned a little bit in the research report about how giving, yes, giving by wealthy individuals is one thing, collective giving, where you have the government and also the public coming together in a structure where there can be collective giving, more sustainable giving, and how that can be brought forward, maybe like, you know, in Malaysia, for example, and how we'd like to encourage that. Did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think and that was a question to Chow, right? Why don't we have a DAF in Hong Kong? So my thinking is that why not have a DAF in Malaysia, right? I mean, the structure is easy to set up. We don't, whether it's a company limited by guarantee or a private limited company, it's easy to set up. But I think that there is a lot of work to be done. So I just hope that one of the bigger banks will think about setting up a DAF. And if you are thinking about the commercial reason, saying like, why should I be setting up this, you know, because my bottom line is hurt as well, I think that complements your wealth management business, and keeping the client, right, and the asset under management as well within the particular bank or financial institution. So I think that could be a win-win. And the fact that Credit Suisse is doing it in Singapore shows that, well, there must be, because pardon me for being very cynical, there must be also commercial reasons as well. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And maybe Elaine would like to offer a Deloitte's DAF at some point to the clients and to everyone else as well. But it's an interesting idea, because I think especially during this time, I mean, one of the things that we do in Labuan is also self-insurance, right? And COVID has brought a lot of change to the insurance landscape. And one of the things that we keep talking about is public-private partnership with regards to creating a social safety net via an insurance structure like a captive or protected cell company, where, you know, everyone is allowed a base, right? Like a universal base, as it were. So nobody gets left behind. And in a way, that would be a great mandate for a DAF, whether it be in Malaysia or in Hong Kong, whether it be Asian based, you know, and it'd be something that us in Labuan, we would be happy. We would be more than happy to facilitate something like this via any of our structures, because obviously you have the private foundations in Labuan. We're the only jurisdiction in Asia that has that, and the protected cell company as well. So, you know, those two, and obviously the company limited by guarantee and trust as well, purpose trust and stuff like that, special trust. So all that is available. I wanted to talk a little bit also, if it's okay with you, about how do you think, where do you see giving? Because we've got another 5 minutes, so I really wanted to finish off with all of you today here. Where do you see, how do you see giving evolve during this crisis that we're in? Do you think that it's going to push giving to a new level? Do you think philanthropy is going to be more democratized, and it's going to be a raison d'etre for a lot of people, a lot of companies? Or do you think that the economic situation will, over the next 12 months, 18 months, actually see giving tapering off? You know, what are your thoughts? Whoever wants to start first, please.
If I may just share with my experience recently, I think the families that I've been talking to in the last few months, they have been, while they are very, the mortality risk has really become very real to them, and that has granted that impetus to start thinking about legacy planning, about transition, about succession planning, and family, and a very important need for family governance. They are also, some of the families are also, you know, really under the gun for the business, so they don't really have that much bandwidth. So there was another family that I was working with that originally wanted to think a little bit about more structured giving, but then right now they said no, let's put that aside. We have other fires to fight. So I think it really depends. There are some fortunate families who they are beneficiaries of this COVID. They are really doing so well. So I would hope, I would welcome having a DEF in Malaysia. I think every country ideally should have their own, because if it needs to be tailored to the tax environment and to encourage and incentivize, you know, giving. Typically, again, driven in part by tax, making it easier for the givers. So, you know, there are people who have benefited a lot, and I hope that, you know, those who are able to give will really be incentivized to give. I think those who are hurting it's hard right now. It's hard for them. But, you know, nothing happens without a reason. And I believe that the hardship they're going through, they will remember it one day. And when they things will turn around. And when they are in a position to give, then it will give them the impetus and the reason and the passion to give. That is my hope.
Yes. Hong-Woo?
Yeah, I think that companies are realizing CSR is very important. They are focusing on it. But like Elin is saying, I think in the next 6 to 12 months, I think it's going to be a bloodbath. There will be a lot of insolvencies going on, and then those that cannot survive will not be thinking, they're thinking about survival. So if we are thinking about evolving giving, I think we have to think out of the box, and we have to think about from the legacy wealth planning perspective, and not from the ultra high net worth, from the middle band, like you say. I think that if we want to ensure that there's more giving, we have to think along those lines.
Yeah, so charity begins at home. Professor Chow, maybe?
Well, maybe. Let me just add an anecdote in Hong Kong. So this appears in the news. So there was an older gentleman who I think was part of this family in Hong Kong who gave close to 1 billion Hong Kong dollar, which is over 100 million Singaporean dollar, to a radio program that he spent some time with. So I think that raised the question, obviously, which we have been discussing all this time, which is awareness. Clearly, this donor wasn't aware of this DAF structure. Had he been aware of this, he could have utilized the fund to, for COVID relief and other related purposes. So I think it's a very important awareness question.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that we all galvanize to continue to give somehow, because it is a gift. Giving is a gift. So all that's left for me to do actually is, first of all, to thank the 200 odd people that decided to actually join us on, live now. So thank you very much for that. We're very appreciative. To thank the panelists for your kind contribution, for staying with us the entire time. We really appreciate it. To Hung Woo and his team at SMU for the friendship and you know, coming up with this great piece of work that we will talk through again. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.